Here, this first one is just going to go over how to plan your essay and how to find the ideas that you're going to write your 2 body paragraphs about. So we're going to jump right in. So we had the passage last week, and we decided, after we broke down the prompts and read the passage, that the 2 main things we need to do in this essay are explain what Berry's rhetorical choices are, and also how he characterizes scientific research. We decided that John M. Berry was the speaker, and that his subject that he's writing about is scientists and their research. Once we broke that down and read the passage, before we read the passage, we set up this T-chart. We asked 2 questions. What are his rhetorical strategies to answer the first part of the prompt? And how does he characterize scientific research to answer the second part of the prompt? And once we find some strategies, and once we find how he characterizes scientific research once, then we have our first body paragraph. Once we find how he characterizes scientific research and some other strategies that he uses, then we have our second body paragraph. But we have to figure those things out first. So we go into the passage. And now let's pretend that I've read the entire thing, okay? And I have a general idea of what these paragraphs are about. My first job as I go in is to make sure that I find paragraphs that I understand. I need to answer the question, how does he characterize scientific research and what strategies does he use? But I can only do that if I am looking at paragraphs I understand. So let's pretend I only understand paragraphs 2 and 3 as of right now. And I understand that in those paragraphs, he is writing about what it means to be a scientist. In other words, he is describing a scientist. More specifically, he is describing their traits. And I know that because when I look in the paragraph, I see a quote like this. To be a scientist requires not only intelligence and curiosity, but passion, patience, creativity, self-sufficiency, and courage. Those are all character traits he is saying a scientist must have, right? A character trait a scientist must have patience, and they must have creativity, and they must have self-sufficiency. So then, the rhetorical choice that he's using is he's describing a scientist. And how he's characterizing scientific research, well, I don't really know because he's describing a scientist. So I need to ask, what does that say about scientific research, right? So I go into my chart, and I write on this side, he is describing a scientist, or giving the definition of a scientist by using words like patience and self-sufficiency. Now, what I need to ask myself is, now that I have an idea of what he's talking about, well, based on this, what is he saying about this main question, right? If he's describing a scientist as patient and self-sufficient, then what does that mean about the work that they do, the research that scientists do? Scientists do these things. Well, that probably means that research takes a long time, right? And if something takes a long time, well, then that means that it is exhausting, tiring, because we get tired after a long time. Because of that inference that I drew from patience being something that takes a long time, I'm able to infer the scientific research, therefore, is exhausting. And I know that self-sufficiency also supports this idea. Now, if I